And we're back, and we're joined by Brit Naas from the Independence Institute. How are you today, Brit?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right, you look at energy and environmental issues over there at Independence Institute, right?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Here's what we wanted to talk about today. You were part of a pretty big study recently that tried to kind of calculate the cost of moving to 100% renewable energy in Colorado. But I think this needs some clarification. There's a difference between renewable energy and that when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, there's a baseload backup there available, ready to go. But that primarily is fossil fuel generated energy because it has to be on demand, right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
You guys try to take a look at what it would take to actually go to completely 100% renewable, including the backup, which means really big batteries, right?
That's correct.
All right.
That's correct.
You guys just weren't sitting around and deciding, hey, let's take a look at what it costs to go to 100% renewables. This is actually prompted by Governor Polis, right?
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, we don't just sit there in our offices, contrary to maybe some popular belief, thinking about ways to obliterate the renewables energy sector. This was prompted by Governor Jared Polis. When he was a gubernatorial candidate, he promised a 100% renewable energy by 2040, and then actually released a roadmap or goal in May to accomplish that. And so that's what prompted us then to say, hey, we should look at this. And when he was on the campaign trail, we had Energy Venture Analysis do a study that focused primarily on the generation, a small section on battery prices. But then recently we decided to commission an actual battery price study, and we used that to then build on that first one.
Okay, so if I understand it right, then what you're looking at is that the energy would be generated by renewable sources, which could be hydro, wind, sun. It could be nuclear power for all we know. It could be many other things. But there has to be, but the actual backup to make sure that everything stays consistent would also be renewable under this scenario that you looked at, right?
Oh, exactly. In Colorado, hydro actually isn't considered renewable, the large-scale hydro. And nuclear wouldn't be either. Now, both of those are options that would reduce our CO2 emissions, which we talk about in the paper, saying, hey, we should maybe consider these, right? If the goal is to reduce CO2, why not consider nuclear? Why not consider large hydro? But yes, in the paper, we primarily take what is the cost of going 100% wind and solar, and then look at what would it cost to back that up. And it would be utility scale batteries. And for lack of a better term, that's kind of the sexy way of saying it. There are other types of storage out there, kinetic, but of course there's trade-offs with those. Kinetic energy storage might be something like that's on a mountainside where you generate electricity while a box or some sort of crate holding gravel goes down, or a tower with concrete blocks and cranes rotating around, lifting and pulling them up and generating kinetic energy. But again, those are trade-offs where you're using a lot of land.
Okay. All right. So you're gonna have to lay it on us. So what did you guys find with the idea of having the power generated by wind and solar primarily, and then backed up by energy stored that was also generated via a renewable source? What's the cost of us getting there?
Well, I
remember,
think
this is just for Colorado, right?
Exactly. Okay. And when we were talking about it earlier, you made a good point where the number sounds fictitious. I mean, it is huge. It's a large number. Now, keep in mind, these are figures that we got from the Energy Information Administration. We're not just pulling out of thin air and saying, hey, this is what it's going to cost. There are projections that say it might be cheaper, and a lot of it's going to depend on where you're at, the weather patterns, the type of generation, renewable generation that's being built or that has been built. But we calculated it would cost about $900 billion for the batteries alone. And that could be, it could grow too, depending on...
So wait, hold on just a sec. You said 900 billion with a B.
900
for
billion.
The battery storage.
For the battery.
You haven't even talked about we're not even at 100% renewable generation, let alone backup, right?
Yes.
All right, so let's throw in, so we have these batteries, these wildly expensive batteries apparently.
Yeah.
And then we still have to build out the capacity to generate 100% renewable.
Yep.
If you throw that in, did you guys come up with a number for that?
Total would be about $940 billion.
Wow.
So predominantly, it's batteries.
Batteries.
It's batteries.
These must be significant battery systems, right?
They are significant, and one of the misconceptions is whether it's power capacity or energy capacity. In simple terms, energy capacity is what we're really concerned about. That's the duration. The type of system that we imagine would basically say, hey, this is going to cover your peak demand. So if the sun doesn't shine for 3 days and the wind doesn't blow for 7, and you basically just have no energy being produced, we have enough battery systems, enough duration capacity to allow the individual who plugs in his toaster, has his TV on, and every light in the house to run his normal life, and then the guy that also turns everything off. They're not going to cut back on their daily electricity use. That's why the number is really quite large. And that's really what's not being talked about.
And so basically this is for us to continue on right now, not even noticing any difference in our power consumption or our ability to consume power.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Now, and keep in mind, these projections are based off of, I believe, and you have to fact check me, viewers, by looking at the report, but 2016 population numbers. By 2040, the state's expected to grow quite a bit. So it could be much larger as well.
All right. Here's the second interesting part. You wrote a piece for Complete Colorado on this, kind of laying out the details, and noting that you even assumed a decreasing price for these batteries because the price of these things is coming down, and that's
definitely
what generally happens as new technology develops. It gets better and the price comes down, and you're still assuming a decreasing price even at that multi-$100 billion number, right?
Exactly. We are. We are.
You had a follow-up piece, and I thought this was really interesting, that Xcel Energy didn't acknowledge your actual number, but Xcel Energy recently acknowledged a massive cost to switching to 100% renewables with battery backup. Tell us about that. What happened?
Well, exactly. I mean, we even have in our report Ben Folk, CEO of Xcel Energy, saying, I'm going to trust science. And right now, science says 60 to 70% renewables. After that 40, 35, 30% range, that's really hard. That's where it really gets expensive. And in that presentation to the Midwestern Governors Association, which we link to, by the way, they even talk about that, building out batteries, it's likely to cost in the trillions. Just having enough renewable energy, that could mean building out the grid up to 8 times. It might not be 8 times, it might just be 3 to 4 times, but that's kind of the reality is, what is it going to look like?
Let's back up for a second and explain that 8 times. So what you're saying is, Xcel is essentially saying that in order to move to 100% renewables, we're going to have to build out a power grid that is roughly 8 times what they actually need.
Up to 8
times to ensure this capacity when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, et cetera, et cetera. Is that right?
Exactly. And it has to do with renewable generation's capacity factors. They're lower than fossil fuels or nuclear. And so you just have to have more online, more producing. And that doesn't mean they're going to be all right next to each other. There might be some in northwestern Colorado. There might be some in southwestern Colorado. But we're going to have more wind farms than we do now, or than what is necessary with just fossil fuel generation. You might have one fossil fuel, one natural gas plant, and in this scenario, 100% renewable scenario, you might have to have 4 wind farms that produce the same amount of electricity as that natural gas plant would.
You make an interesting point in the piece we published in Complete that you said that Xcel doesn't say it explicitly, but the implicitly they seem to be suggesting that maybe nuclear isn't such an unreasonable option to take a look at given this massive cost. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right. I mean, that's what we even say in our report. It's not a peer-reviewed report. It's not even a technical report. It has some technical components to it, but what we're trying to say is, hey, people, heads up. This is a plan. This is a goal. Let's at least acknowledge that it's going to be expensive to get there.
All right. Brit, thanks so much for coming. You can find that report at independenceinstitute.org, and you can check us out at CompleteColorado.com. We'll see you next week. Thanks.